last 24 hours. And if you haven't seen it, you will heard it. You will in just a couple of minutes. We'll get to some of that stuff. And in particular, the video that, and the reason why I'm going to talk about what I talk about today is because this particular parent went out of his way to explain to a school board, another school board, that they're tired of this feigned racism being shoved down at everybody's throat. But I wanted to start out by making a statement that I've made before in the past. I've written a couple of columns about it. In fact, one column that I wrote that the day wouldn't print was pretty much the deciding factor for me not writing anymore for the day paper, because they didn't want to, I guess, facilitate that thought, the thought that I had and now actually has become much more mainstream. But when I wrote it over a year ago, they didn't want to have anything to do with that, which is fine, it's their decision. But I still believe to this day, I believe then, I believe now, that America is the least racist nation on earth. And as I've said before, these exact words, it may be the least racist country in the history of the planet. And you may be sitting back in your chair right now saying to yourself, what is he talking about? I turn on the television at night, all I see is racial injustices everywhere. Black people getting shot by white cops, and all this that's going on in the schools, and black folks are not working as much as white folks, are not making as much, and blah blah blah. Look what's going on in the NFL, only one black coach, and there's got to be racism everywhere. I stand by it. The United States is the least racist nation on earth, period. End of story. I mean, I could give you a history lesson as far as racism goes in the country. We can go all the way back to the founding fathers, if you'd like. And yes, this country has had racism in it. There are racists right now. There's probably a racist in your neighborhood. I didn't say there's no racism. I said it's the least racist. And people will point to slavery. And they'll go, oh my God, what is he talking about? We had slavery. Yes, we had slavery. And so did every other country in the world. Doesn't make it right, but we had it. We had it. And since the recorded history of man began, there has been slavery. There's slavery now. There are millions of people who are still enslaved. Now, today, 2022. Nobody says anything about that. No global outrage. Why not? America is the least racist nation in the history of the planet. When our founding fathers forged the Declaration of Independence, the freedom of it from England, slavery was everywhere. And from the time the last person signed that document until eventually the Revolutionary War and winning of that, moving forward from that, think about it. That was 1776. By the time the Civil War was over, okay? By the time the Civil War was over, America was in the infancy of trying to divorce itself from slavery and racism. Now, it hasn't been able to do that completely, right? Of course not. You can't control what everybody thinks. But in a mere matter of less than 100 years, in the whole history of this planet, and then the history again of civilized culture, in less than 100 years, the founding fathers were so brilliant and so progressive that they began this thought that slavery was wrong. And they defeated it in less than 100 years. So you can say, oh, well, these white men owned slaves, and Washington owned slaves, and Jefferson owned slaves, and they did. But if you look at the history, Washington freed all of his slaves before he died. Jefferson wanted to free all his slaves, but he couldn't afford it. Not because he couldn't afford not having these folks around, but there were certain laws in place that if you freed a slave, you had to give them a certain amount of money to do it. He didn't have it. Now, I'm not exonerating these folks for doing what they had done. I mean, at the time, they probably realized that having slaves was not right and should have been more proactive, I'm sure, in a more timely fashion. But in the grand scheme of things, what this country has accomplished in a short period of time is remarkable, considering what's happening in other places. And another phrase I've said over and over again, each passing generation, the very idea that people are judged solely by their skin color fades. The United States of America, will move mountains to rectify injustices. We always have. Now, demographics are changing, that's clear. And that being the case, why is it necessary to try to impose this artificial guilt on the citizens of this country? Citizens who had nothing to do with these perceived injustices that have happened over the last 200 years. Equity is very different than equality. We've talked about that many times. These, I guess, go-to words and phrases from our progressive left friends like social justice and diversity and inclusion and cultural responsiveness, critical race theory. They're hot-button topics that are, designed to try to get a reaction from folks. I gotta say, one thing. I mean, y'all know me, I'm white, right? I'm white. I mean, my mom was full-blooded Italian, blah, blah, blah. We can go down with your definition of white as opposed to my definition of whatever. To me, it doesn't matter. But if I were a person of color today, I would be outraged that progressives have marginalized and coddled me because of my skin tone and felt like they needed to defend me because of the color of my skin. I'd be furious if that were the case. If a lily white neighbor who never so much has had more than a 3-minute conversation with a black man has the Black Lives Matter sign on their front stoop and is out there every once in a while at a rally or a protest, that person would make me mad as hell, because that person doesn't know what the hell he's talking about or she's talking about. They are racked with some kind of guilt, but that's guilt from maybe their own upbringing. I had a conversation the other day with a gentleman, person of color. I told him, I said, we had a conversation for over an hour, like an hour and a half in the studio. And I said, I don't feel an ounce of guilt, not one. Not the teeniest, tiniest ounce of guilt in my body, not a molecule of it. And I thought he was a little stunned by that. I don't feel it because I don't judge people by what they look like. And again, to steal lines today, since we're doing that over and over again, I always go back to the ELci line, which is just judge somebody by their character, the content of their character.